What if everything we know about our origins, about our evolutionary history, was a misinterpretation? If the jungle of hominids we've imagined was a mistake, it would undoubtedly overturn everything we think we are. What if this wasn't just a baseless thought, but had real foundations? Imagine a distant future where our civilization has vanished for millennia. Wars, disasters, extinctions. Who can say? But one day, somewhere in Africa, a group of archaeologists discovers a human skeleton. It's short, with sturdy bones, a slightly elongated skull. They catalog it carefully and call it Homo africanensis. Then, thousands of kilometers further north, in the cold Swedish tundra, they find another one, tall, with a rounded skull and slender bones. They call it Homo borealis. Same period, same tools, but different morphologies. The conclusion is two distinct species, maybe cousins, maybe competitors. And yet those two skeletons were both Homo sapiens. They were us, you, me, modern humans, separated only by place of birth. Of course, someone might argue that a future science would have genetic tools to recognize the identity of the species, and that's probably true. But the point isn't the technology, it's the mental approach, because today we are that science of the future. And yet we base much of our evolutionary classification on scattered bones, often without DNA, decontextualized, fragile. The main question from our initial point is, how many hominids we consider different species, or actually just variations of the same human? We live in an era where science seeks answers even in the past. But in the field of human evolution, perhaps the answers we construct are less solid than they seem. We have drawn family trees, invented Latin names, imagined elaborate evolutionary branches, but everything is based on bones, fragments, reconstructions, and sometimes more than reconstructions, projections. The thought experiment that began this video isn't just a game, it's central to our investigation today. We are making in the present the same mistakes we imagined in the future. We are building the story of our origins on solid foundations or on a castle of sand. In the next chapters, we'll explore the most iconic and controversial paleoanthropology evidence, from Lucy's fragments to the mysteries. I'm on a lady. It will be a journey that will challenge not the fossils, but the stories we have built around them. But before we delve into this extraordinary mystery, if you want to support this kind of independent research and not miss the upcoming investigations, now is the right time to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. For decades, the dominant narrative about human evolution has been that of a linear path, a steady march from primate to Homo sapiens. Although science now presents a more complex image, an intricate bush, the idea of an orderly progression continues to influence the way we think. The deeper we explore the past, the more that Bush's order becomes chaos. Because there isn't a missing link, there are dozens of them, all different, all incomplete, and above all controversial. Donald Johnson, the father of Lucy, admitted it honestly.
We have discovered many fragments, but what we really lack is a clear sequence, a continuous thread, and maybe there never was one.
Over time, the scientific community has invented dozens of names for these fragments: Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, Homo rudolfensis, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis. Sometimes they're separated by just a few centimeters of difference in the skull, sometimes by a smaller molar. From there, a new branch and hypothesis emerged, another version of the human family tree. But that tree is starting to look more like a tangled bush, or, as the paleontologist Bernard Wood ironically said,
"We can no longer talk about the tree of human evolution. It's more like a badly trimmed hedge."
And perhaps we should add, it's also made of mirrors. Mirrors reflecting our need for order more than nature's true design. So the problem isn't really the number of species we've identified. The problem is the kind of evidence we've historically based them on. A morphological basis, often fragile, made up of just a few bones. Only recently have we started trying to integrate it, and sometimes contradict with data from other disciplines like genetics. A skull found at Kubifora in Kenya was initially attributed to Homo habilis. Then someone said it looked too modern. It became Homo rudolfensis. Then others suggested it was just a young specimen of Homo erectus. One fossil, three names, and no certainty. And so a troubling question arises. How many of our ancestors really existed as distinct species? And how many are just regional or individual variations of the same ancient humanity? This is where paleogenetics comes in. The revolution of Svante Pääbo and his colleagues has opened a door to the past, and behind that door we haven't found confirmations, but new complexities. On one hand, it showed that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Sapiens were genetically distinct, but on the other hand, they often interbred, and those crossings are written in our bodies. All non-African people have Neanderthal genes. Paleogenetics shows there were differences, but not barriers. As Pääbo explained,
the clear distinctions between ancient human species become less clear when you discover that they repeatedly interbred with each other.
Be careful. It's not that they were all the same, but our view of species as closed, non-interacting groups doesn't apply to the Homo genus. Do we ask if the classic evolutionary model has led us to expect slow, gradual processes? So how does it fit then with the picture that modern paleontology gives us, made up of complex hybridizations, possible stasis and rapid diversifications, and fossils that seem to challenge a linear progression? Let's close our eyes and picture a future laboratory. A sterile, silent place with 2 tables and 2 skeletons laid out. No labels, no context, just bones. On the first table, we find a skeleton that's 6'3", with a wide and rounded skull, light bones, and long limbs. On the second table, there's a skeleton that's 5'7", with a narrower and elongated skull, pronounced cheekbones, and dense, robust bones. We know nothing about these skeletons. We have no objects, we don't know their culture, and we have no surviving DNA at the time. What conclusion would future paleoanthropologists draw? Are they 2 individuals of the same species, or are they 2 different hominids evolved in separate environments with distinct characteristics? Let's open our eyes again, because those 2 bodies are real. One Ethiopian, one Swedish. Today we see them sitting on the same plane, eating global food, speaking the same digital language, using the same tools. But their bones, stripped of everything, could tell another story. A story of difference, not unity. A story that today we would call evolutionary divergence. But maybe it's just human variation. And if this difference in the future were enough to create new species, how many of the species in the past were created this way? By mistake or by interpretative necessity? Jonathan Marks, the evolutionary biologist, explained it clearly.
The variation within the modern human species is so wide that it overlaps with the criteria we use to classify different fossil species.
If 2 people from our time can look so different, how can we be sure that the scattered remains found in Africa, Asia, or Indonesia really belong to distinct species? We can't know for sure, and yet we've built an entire narrative of human evolution on these remains. But what happens if the foundation on which that story rests is thinner than we want to admit? The craniometer, the instrument used to measure skulls and calculate angles and volumes, has a long and questionable history. Once used to legitimize scientific racism, today it is still the basic tool for fossil classification. Bones don't reveal the whole truth, as 19th century anatomists already understood.
Many of the species we have separated might just be regional populations of the same species. We're getting lost in the details.
Because bones can tell a story, but when we look at them in isolation, stripped of culture, language, and context, the story they tell might be misleading. Not an intentional lie, but an elegant, coherent, seductive construction that risks reflecting our own assumptions, more than just a person's biology. When we talk about human evolution, what is most lacking is completeness. If, in our initial provocation to simplify the concept, we hypothesize that scientists had the entire skeleton of two different men at their disposal, the reality of the findings is even more complex because from the history of our past we have thousands of fragments, but very few almost complete skeletons. And the few we do have not only fail to confirm the official story, but sometimes even seem to contradict it. If a scientific theory's strength is its adaptability to new evidence, what happens when revisions become frequent and significant? It's reasonable to ask if we're just refining the model or reaching the limits of a paradigm that can't handle the data's complexity. Kenya, 1984. An almost complete skeleton is discovered on Lake Turkana's shores. He's a boy, maybe 10 or 12 years old tall, well-proportioned and well-built. However, his skull is different from ours, smaller, but otherwise, we could meet him on the street. Scientists call him Homo ergaster, some say erectus, but how could a body so similar to ours exist 1,600,000 years ago? South Africa, 2013. In a deep cave, the remains of at least 15 individuals are found. They are small, with tiny skulls, less than half the size of ours, but they buried their dead. Maybe they used fire, maybe they lived in groups. The problem is, no one knows where to place them. They are too primitive to be modern, but too intelligent to be primitive. So much so that the discoverer himself, Professor Lee Berger, has expressed the paradox of this discovery several times. Artie, 4.4 million years ago. Lucy, 3.2 million years ago. They call them our ancestors. They're bipeds, but their bodies are small with long ape-like arms, hands suited for climbing, and tiny skulls. Artie was reconstructed from fragments so fragile that her pelvis was practically recreated. Laboratory. The team of scientists led by Tim White took more than 15 years to publish the complete study. But even today, despite the monumental nature of the work, the conclusions are debated. Some paleontologists question the interpretation of its bipedalism and its exact position in our lineage. The question then remains open. Are Artie and Lucy our direct ancestors, or just collateral relatives? Or maybe their reconstructions have led us to some misunderstandings. Israel, Kafze, and School Caves, skeletons of Homo sapiens identical to us, dated 90,000, 120,000 years ago, have been found here. But according to the official theory, modern humans would have left Africa only 70,000 years ago. How do we explain this early presence?
If these fossils had been found in Europe, we would have called them modern humans. But in the Middle East, they force us to reconsider everything.
As we've seen whenever we find an almost complete skeleton, this doesn't confirm the model. On the contrary, it often undermines it. Too modern, too primitive, too similar to us, or too unusual. So the question isn't just whether we're telling the story of mankind well, the question is whether we're telling the right story. A critic would say that these are the anomalies that drive science forward, that force it to review and improve its models, and that's true. But when exceptions outnumber confirmations, isn't it fair to question if the problem is with the model itself? A statement has circulated for years in science's most uncomfortable corridors. It's not written in textbooks, it's not mentioned at conferences, but it's been whispered by more than one serious scholar. All the bones from which we've derived the history of human evolution could fit inside a suitcase. It's a provocation, and while a trunk might be needed today, the uncomfortable truth this image suggests remains. Our knowledge is based on a handful of nearly complete skeletons and thousands of isolated fragments. The same paleoanthropologist, Donald Johanson, the discoverer of Lucy, once said that before their discovery, the fossil evidence for human evolution was so scarce that it could have fit in the palm of a hand. And even after that, we might add, they haven't increased much. A scientific theory is strengthened by the accumulation of evidence. But here, the more we dig, the more the gaps increase. Despite the progress, the fossil record remains extremely fragmentary. In some ways, it's like trying to reconstruct a book when you only have a few words on each page. Of course, an evolutionist would reply that even if there are only a few words, they all point in the same direction, suggesting a coherent plot of common descent. But a few words can also imply many different plots. So an inevitable question we should ask ourselves is whether we've found a credible story, or if we've just selected the one that best fit our expectations. Did we actually observe the process or just reconstruct it afterward? What happens when we assemble pieces from different people found in various places and times? That's where we create the blueprint for the human story. Today, compared to the past, we are helped by sophisticated techniques, precise radiometric dating, isotopic analyses that reveal diet and migrations, and tomography that uncovers internal structures. And yet, despite this technological arsenal, the final step, the attribution of a fragment to a species and its placement in the family tree, remains a deeply interpretive act. It happened with Homo habilis, defined by scattered pieces, a skull here, a jaw there. It happened with Homo rudolfensis, which according to some might not even exist as a species. There's also the notable case of the Piltdown Man, a fake mix of human bones and an orangutan jaw that was wrongly believed to be a real ancestor for decades. A fraud accepted by the scientific community for nearly 40 years because the desire to find the missing link outweighed rationality. England, 1912. An amateur archaeologist, Charles Dawson, claims to have discovered the missing link between man and primate. A modern skull with an ape-like jaw, they call it Eoanthropus dawsoni, the dawn of humanity. For more than 40 years, the Piltdown Man was shown in museums, featured in books, and taught in schools. But then, in 1953, the truth was revealed. It was a hoax. An orangutan jaw had been assembled with a human skull, and to make them look older, they were stained with chemicals. Some might say that, despite everything, science gets it right in the end. But the fact that such a blatant fraud was accepted for 40 years remains a powerful warning. Even science can believe what it wants to believe. The anthropologist Stephen Jay Gould commented bitterly,
Piltdown was accepted because it told English science exactly what it wanted to hear.
Indonesia, year 2003. A 1-meter-tall skeleton with a tiny skull is discovered and named Homo floresiensis. The media quickly focused on the human hobbit, a new species that lived 18,000 years ago, later dated to 50,000 years ago. But several scholars do not agree with this classification, such as Robert Martin. We may not have found a new species, but a Homo sapiens with microcephaly. Others have suggested island dwarfism, genetic deformities, or pathological conditions. In short, a new species could simply be a sick individual, a pathological variant, or an isolated population. Though consensus now favors the distinct species hypothesis, the prolonged debate highlights how hard it is to distinguish a true species from an extreme variation. A new species label makes headlines while uncertainty fades quietly. How many discoveries in our evolutionary atlases are truly what we think, and how many will stay that way, only until we find something that disproves them? 1972, Kubifora, Kenya. A skull with a flat face is found. It's not clear who it belongs to, but it's different from Homo habilis. So a new species is created, Homo rudolfensis. But there are no associated skeletons, just a handful of remains. But the doubt grows, especially when voiced by a scientist who helped classify it.
We don't have enough data to know if rudolfensis is really a distinct species. It might not exist at all.
In this whole story, skulls measured, teeth cataloged, femurs dated with radiocarbon, maybe we've forgotten a fundamental question. What makes a human being human? It's a question that no bone, no skull, no tooth can really answer. Because humanity isn't measured in cubic centimeters, but in intentions, in consciousness. Consciousness remains the biggest challenge for the evolutionary paradigm, despite evolutionary neuroscience providing models of its origin. It represents a qualitative leap. A complete explanation within a gradualist and materialist framework remains the focus of ongoing scientific and philosophical debate. We have clear examples that cranial volume doesn't define consciousness. Homo naledi had a brain the size of a chimpanzee's, yet it may have buried its dead, may have made fires, and may have moved in groups. It's not even upright posture. Many Australopithecines also walked on two legs. But walking is not thinking, walking is not imagining, walking is not leaving traces of your own soul imprinted on stone. When you discover a crafted object, a cave painting, a burial with flowers, you are faced with something that goes beyond the bone. You are faced with a spark of humanity. It has a sign of consciousness.
Physical appearance doesn't tell us everything. Some hominids look like us, but maybe they didn't think like us. Others were different in body, but capable of symbolic thought. And this changes everything.
A biologist might accuse us of resorting to a mystery, consciousness, to criticize what is measurable. He might say that we are creating a false dichotomy between body and mind, but this is not a dichotomy. It's a crack, an epistemological crack. Because if the brain hardware is too primitive for certain symbolic functions, then something doesn't add up. Either we are underestimating these ancient hominids, or we are overestimating our model. But now let's go back for a moment to Hominid lady. As we have seen, she had a small skull. We have no evidence that she used language or sophisticated tools. And yet perhaps she buried her dead in the deepest darkness of a cave with a care that would seem ritualistic. And so it's inevitable to wonder how a creature like that, lacking by our standards, the necessary intelligence, could perform such a meaningful act. We started from a paradox: two modern humans, found on different continents, interpreted as separate species. A mistake that someone could make in a distant future. Clearly, it's a provocation, but this provocation is useful for asking ourselves if we are making the same mistake today. As we've seen, the more we explore the past, the more we realize we don't know what we're seeking, and we're using laboratory tools to measure a story that is also awareness, culture, and intent. And maybe no evolutionary theory, no matter how refined, can really grasp it all. Our origins today are not a line drawn with certainty. They're not an evolutionary fairy tale. On a single day, man stood up and everything started. They are a confused mosaic of remains and hypotheses, a puzzle with more holes than pieces. Maybe our past is much darker than we want to admit, more chaotic and more unpredictable. And maybe that's exactly why the picture that emerges requires an explanatory model that's much more complex and nuanced than what the classic evolutionary narrative has led us to believe. Because in the end, the story of man is not a march. It's not even maybe just a matter of biology. It's a question, an ancient question, never resolved. At this point, we're really curious to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments what you think and if you liked the video. And if you want to support our work, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.